Hi, and welcome to this series where we're discussing how doula support across all of life's thresholds can take us out of the mindset of needing to be fixed and into a way of authenticity and groundedness and flourishing. And so, this is a four-part series. And in the first part of this series, I want to talk about this myth of being fixed. I think every day as we scroll and see things, we are sold this idea that there's this one more thing that we can be fixed about us, and one more thing. It can be external, it can be internal, but I think it's really, really sneaky. And obviously, like billions and billions and billions of dollars, like the economy basically requires this and like runs off of this idea that, like, especially femmes have something that needs to be fixed about them, and that can buy that. And I think a really sneaky way that this happens is in like self-help work of like there's one more book you need to read and one more practice. And like I often laugh because it's like if I did everything that I've been told I need to do to like self-actualize, my morning routine would be like 7 hours. It would be the only thing I could devote myself to. And still I would be on this, like, I don't know, I think of it almost as like a fake journey towards finding fixable things about myself. And the reason I think of it as fake is we have, like tens of thousands of thoughts a day and tens of thousands of beliefs and tens and thousands of things about us and like small characteristics and things. And it's like, a journey towards fixing all of that, whatever that means, however we define that, will be endless, and it will get us nowhere, and it'll keep us off. It'll keep us very loyal consumers of what we think are like good things to consume, like classes and courses and all those things. But what it really comes down to is that is just similar to any other thing we're told we can fix about ourselves, be it our hair, our skin, something else. It's like this endless thing where it's never going to be enough. And yeah, it's a myth. There's nothing to fix about you. So for myself, like this started for me when I was in grad school in 2019. Something really terrible happened, and it landed me on a therapist couch. And I had been one of those kids who had like mandated therapy growing up, given the circumstances in my home and things like that. So I just I was a big no to therapy. This landed me on a therapy couch, and I got it became this thing where I was like, oh, I can fix myself. I can fix these things about myself. And I started going to the Adult Children with Addicts 12-step program, and found that really helpful. And that was like a gateway. And then I started to do more spiritual things and all these things. And I'm Indigenous, and I'm a part of a Sundance ceremony community and like an NAP community and things like that. And so there's just so much that I was like, that really made like open the door to for me. And it was like a gateway drug for me into thinking like, oh, I can spend all of my time searching through myself and looking for things and finding things to fix. And someday I'll be fixed, and then everything will be okay, and I will be okay, and terrible things won't happen to me anymore. And that's not true. And it led to a lot of frustration because I, was trying everything and doing constant things, and like self-help and fixing myself became basically the only thing I did. And it also became, I realized this a little bit in hindsight, this very like self-absorbed part of my life. Whereas like all I was thinking about is like, oh, I'm having this reaction to this, so I need to fix this thing about myself, this, that, and the other thing. And thus I wasn't present in any of my relationships. I wasn't, none of these proven strategies were allowing me to like be in my life. And all of them were keeping me from like being a human being. And what I realized more and more is that I knew exactly what I needed to be well. I was the expert in my life. And what I needed was to be held and supported across that. And in this way, like doulaed across that rather than like fixed across that. Because for those of us who, I guess for any of us, can become easy to punish ourselves, and like fixing can become like a realm of punishing. And so this is none of our faults, right? We are conditioned from childhood to believe that if there's discomfort or things in our life, that something is wrong. And that, our little selves get these imprints of like, oh, if I hadn't done that, I'd be more lovable. If I hadn't done that. And like, believe me, I am very pro like inner child healing. I spend a lot of time with my inner child. But I realized that I was actually, rather than gaining trust with my inner child, losing trust with my inner child, because I was always going in to like fix something or rewrite something or something, rather than truly spend time and just listen to the needs of what the times in my life where I didn't have my needs met. And so and I think even if we think about big displays of emotion or things like that when we're young, are seen as, that something is wrong. And so that discomfort shows us that, we're told that something's wrong with us. Um, and so this fix me story, this that narrative goes back a really far way for a lot of us. And thus we're not to blame that, for thinking that, we can be fixed in some way. But more and more, as I've, offer doula support across thresholds, what I realize is that as we hold people in their discomfort, in their transition, in their creative projects, in all of these life's thresholds, their expertise really comes out and they have those tools and that innate knowing that's like in their bones of like what they need and who they are. And so rather than fixing, a lot of what we're doing is like peeling back and taking away layers of things that have built up. I've heard it compared to like scar tissue or something where it's like, there's a small wound or something that happens, and then our behaviors and coping mechanisms create the scar tissue around it. So then suddenly it's a much larger, let's say, issue than it would have been if we just were able to see it for what it is. And so I see so much of the doula work is rather than fixing, it's going backward in time and peeling back and getting folks back to that innate knowing that they have in their bones of what they need and who they are and the tools that work for them, rather than, as I mentioned, that like what would be a 7-hour morning routine if we did all of these advice things that we're supposed to do to fix ourselves. Rather, it's like, what are the key tools that work, and how can it's all about, this process is all about building trust, right? Trust with self, trust with that younger self, trust with future versions of yourself, trust with how you maintain resources, all of these things, how you care for yourself. And so when we are, rather than breaking trust by being like, you need to be fixed, you need to be fixed, and constantly, that sort of fix me energy is always this there's an insatiability to it, right? There's this like, this will never be enough, this will never be enough, this will never be enough. There's one more thing to fix, there's one more thing to fix. Rather than when we're in this peeling back layer, it's like, how much closer can I get to myself? And how can I, maintain that closeness and build that trust? And that really builds, we learn so much about ourselves when we're in a trust building exercise and a peeling away from conditioning exercise, rather than a like going in with a toolbox and like trying to tinker around without that deep listening and deep holding. And yeah, and I found so much that the, things that we sometimes turn away from in a fixing mindset, like grief, where it's like we want to make it go away. We're trying to get all these things to go away because of their discomfort. When we can turn toward discomfort, there's immense creativity and connection and possibility in all of this. And so fixing turns us away from what we need, and turning toward and being held through brings us closer to ourselves, brings us closer to trust, and allows us to realize the potential in all of life's changes. And as we know, the constant of life is change. And I'll talk more about this in a future segment. But capitalism profits so much off of our belief that we're perpetually insufficient. Billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and beyond billions and trillions of dollars are made on this sense of insufficiency, and rather trying to fix ourselves by consuming our way through more tools, more books, more and more and more, and doula support across thresholds. What that really is holding you in a way and creating, threshold mapping across this threshold where it's, you realize that, you have those tools, and so much of that is innate in that body wisdom. And you just get to trust that and be with that, rather than this sense of, I can, one more thing, one more purchase, one more something will fix me. And yeah, and I mean, there's so many examples of this, right? Of the examples of fix me messages that we get in school. If, for example, I was not a strong math student, I find statistics and things fascinating, and I'm not good at them. And so, then it's like, well, if you're not good at those, then you often have to go and seek extra help and, are pressured to, study harder and work harder and things like that. Whereas, and so you can fix the problem, fix not having the natural gift for that. media is an endless, endless, endless source of places that ask us to and show us that there's a fixability. In magazines, I remember when I was young, I loved to go to, and I still do, like whenever it's September and September issues of magazines come out, I get so excited and I buy them and I sit with them and go through them. But when I was young, I go to the library and read, I had, disordered eating as a young person, and I would go and read the health magazines like Self and others like that, and think, oh, they're, these folks have the expertise in how to fix me and how to fix my body and how to fix this. And now it's, let's see, I was 10 then and I'm 30 now. 20 years later, I'm learning about trauma-informed nutrition and how the food choices we make have so much more to do than a simple choice, but like, biological dependencies and adrenalizing ourselves and things like that. And so it's like all these things I thought I could fix are actually things that, don't need to be fixed, but just need to be witnessed. And somatics has been such a key tool for me in that, of just like witnessing my body and sort of almost purging myself of years and decades of built up, messaging and all these things from media about things about me that needed to be fixed. I'm thinking back to that math example I gave, that followed me through my whole life. And then when I went to grad school, I almost didn't go because I knew I'd have to take biostatistics and epigenetics, and I knew that there epidemiology, sorry, and I knew there would be math involved in that. And I used the same tools that I used as a young person, where I sat in the front of the class and I took all of the notes and I worked all of the office hours, and just tried to fix that part of myself. Rather than, I imagine what could have beautifully happened if that time and energy had spent, making peace with my reality as it was my talents as they were, and understanding that some necessary things have to be learned, but it's not something that needs to be fixed about me. It's just like, I need to learn how I can learn this. And I've been talking a lot with other friends. I have a diagnosis of ADHD, and I didn't get that diagnosis until much later in life. I got it when I was like 28, so about 2.5, 3 years ago. And what I have learned in that is that I know, I'm not making this case for anybody else, but for myself, part of me is grateful that that's when it was caught, because I had built, in coping with the brain that I had built all of these systems that really work for me and allow my creativity to be in the world and all these other things. And I think, had I known that there was this diagnosis that I had, and that I would have immediately, if I had gotten it at an earlier time in my life when I was in more of a fix me part of my life, I've tried to fix it and tried to get my brain to work in a more linear way. And I think that I would have lost a lot of the magic that I have and the creativity that I have, and the things that the systems that work for me, and things like that. And rather than trying to like straighten out my brain, allowing it to be the wavy form that it is. And so, I think this dual mindset saves us from this sort of idea that there is a right and a wrong, and a black and a white, and the right way to be and the wrong way to be, and that there's a binary at all, and allows the gray area to be true, and allows swirls and twirls and spirals to happen in our journeys, because what we're doing ultimately is building that trust with self. Through witnessing ourselves in the moment that is, and letting things be as they are and navigating as they are, rather than, this sort of frantic energy that takes over, at least for me, and I certainly see it in my clients when they're searching and searching and searching for fixable things. And I've also found, which is a sneaky part of healing, that this fix me energy also has kept me, and sometimes does if I'm not careful, from what really needs to be witnessed in that moment. So for example, it's like there could be a big rupture in my life of say a relationship, and I'll be looking at my phone list of all of the shadow words I need to look at, and all of the things unrelated to the rupture. I'm not meeting the rupture in life. Instead, I'm like following this formulaic list of how to fix myself and what processes I go to with that, when actually the most healing and trust building and urgent thing for me to do is look at the rupture, see what lessons are there for me, hold myself through that, use the tools that work for me, rather than ignoring that to be on my list of fixing. I can meet life each day and know that I have the tools each day to hold me through whatever it is that comes up. Um, And I want to talk about wholeness, because whole things don't need fixing, right? And so there's, in my tradition, as I mentioned, I'm Indigenous, there's this sense that we are a part of a wholeness, a oneness of creation. This wisdom shares that, there's wholeness can't be broken. Certainly damage can be done and things can be hurt, but we can never quite be broken or need fixing. Rather, wholeness is something to be always honored and returned to, and held sacred. And so there is a difference then between healing and fixing. Healing, as I mentioned before, in my mindset is more of a peeling away and of a trust building exercise between us and ourselves and our relations and our processes and things like that. And, to me, if I think about the healing nature of, using the tools we have to nourish our bodies and be in right relationship with each other and spend time in nature and whatever other tools work, that has a much more balancing and whole to it than does this idea of fixing and digging and looking and tinkering and all of that. And it's like, for me, healing has this like naturalness to it and this like returning home, whereas fixing has this like dominion and this like control and things like that. And even if you just, if you just sit and hear the word like healing in your body, and then how different it feels when you hear the word fix. These are very different things. And I think sometimes they get used interchangeably to sell us things, but really noticing, I think in connection doula work, what we do is we look at what elements really are healing for you and what support you need that feels good now across whatever threshold you're crossing, as opposed to this imaginary game of fixing. And in this idea of wholeness, as I briefly mentioned before, things like grief, things like breakups or transitions in relationships or identity shifts or huge creations or changes in identity and things that are often seen as problems or burdens by society, they become our portals when we have doula care across them. And grief specifically is one I think a lot about because so often grief is seen as this thing we need to, again, fix or turn away from or get over or overcome. But when we don't view it as a problem or something needs to be, gone away from, it becomes a portal into so much creativity and love and connection. And a friend and I hosted this group called Grief and Cake, and it was a 6-month collective grief group for BIPOC folks. And in doing that, we, just saw how transformational it was to sit with grief. And we define grief really broadly: ancestral grief, personal grief, grief of loss, environmental grief, like any type of grief. And we found that just in sitting together, there was a true magic. And grief wasn't a problem. Grief was something that was met with communal love and cake, and it was allowed to be years old or brand new or transformed in some way. And so in this way, these things that are seen as a problem, like grief, became a portal into more connection. And people spent a lot of time being creative at Grief and Cake and making things and transmuting. And there's just this great alchemy when we get rid of what we think of our problems. Or, I think often when relationships end, that can be seen as a failure of some kind or a shortcoming or something. But in reality, it's not a problem. It's not a shortcoming. It's an end, and end is a portal to something new. And who do we want to be on the other side of this ending? And what does it mean for beginnings? And so doula support does all of this. It allows problems and what we're told are problems to really, when we look at them honestly and they look back at us, they tell us what they are. And we don't have to define them as anything or put any sort of, like label on them. They just are what they are. And we let them show us what they are. And we let that be different each day because we're crossing this threshold with self-trust and flexibility. Um, beyond that, there's certainly evidence, through neuroscience of why this idea of fixing and defining problems and problem after problem after problem actually creates more suffering and creates this fixation that where, our neural pathways get stronger and stronger the more we travel them, right? And so if we're constantly, every time something happens, we're tracing it back to fix, something's wrong, alert, alert, like that causes a lot of suffering in the brain as opposed to meeting life gently as it arises and letting it be what it is, letting ourselves meet that moment. Then we no longer trying to fix, and we're just no longer perpetuating, suffering. We instead prune back, what we might call harmful or trust breaking neural pathways, instead create ones where remind ourselves of how capable we are to meet each thing that comes and how much we can trust ourselves to meet what comes and things like that. And so when we stop seeing ourselves as broken, we, all change and things become really exciting. And when we stop seeing ourselves as someone to be fixed, we're much more present in our lives and much less self-absorbed with ourselves and this idea of fix and perform and fix. And instead, with that presence, we meet life much more effectively, much more presently. Things become a lot easier because we're not just in a constant self-absorption of me and what and how and things. And instead, it's just like, this is who I am. This is, I trust myself to know each day that I have the tools and the expertise to do what I need and things like that. So yeah, so there's just so much. I had two clients who were going through a divorce, and they hired me for their divorce, and they cared about each other, and they didn't want their divorce to become something where they started to treat each other poorly or where they lost track of their care for each other or had to call in a lawyer, things like that. And then on the other side of that, because it wasn't deemed this bad, broken relationship, but a relationship that was changing form, they were able to come out as friends and people who still deeply care about each other and in each other's lives, because it wasn't seen as a break or something that needed to be fixed, but rather something that just needed to be held as it transformed. Now their children have two parents who, see each other and are friends and spend time with each other. And, their whole lives, the ripple effects of just being held rather than hiring a legal team to fix something that's broken or to end something that's broken. Their whole lives are different because of it. They still get to have each other in each other's lives, and just so much changed because of that. And that's similar when I work with folks who are stuck at a creative project, and feel like, oh, I need to, my systems must be broken. I need to spend this many hours each day doing this, and it puts pressure and pressure and pressure. And instead, when they just sort of let go and ask the project, what would you want me to know? And they stop trying to fix what they assumed is broken. They see that oh, this is actually a rerouting to this. And so much becomes possible when we just take off the pressure of holding it so tightly and being like, I need to hold this together till I can fix it, or I need to fix this thing that isn't actually broken. So yeah, so in these ways, in these examples, what we're showing is that our discomfort has a message for us. And that in this way, discomfort or change or transition is a messenger. And when we trust ourselves to be able to hold that message and see that message, so much becomes possible. And there's this intelligence that we build of difficult emotions and what our body wants from us in difficult emotions. And we do this mapping together in connection to the support of what sort of support and things and mindsets and realities do we want to be grounded in during difficult transitions, in big transitions. And so that you have those tools for yourself, in this transition and in transitions to come. And when we allow discomfort to be filled with potential and possibility, so much becomes possible. And it almost, as soon as we redefine it as filled with possibility, the discomfort shifts a little bit and where you can see a little clearer. And just remembering, something that I bring my clients back to over and over is that when we try to eliminate discomfort, it's like trying to eliminate transformation. It's trying to hold on to things that no longer exist because changes happen and change is inevitable. And I think about this with postpartum folks all the time. We get so much messaging we want to go back to the way our bodies were before and our relationships were before and all of those things were before. And this isn't just postpartum birth. If you think about after a breakup or after a career change, we still want the comforts of before. And when we do that, we hold on to something that no longer exists and we discredit all that's possible in that change. And in trying to go back, we expend so much energy rather than how that energy could be used to turn and move forward with this new information, with this new change. And so when we allow change to happen, because we trust ourselves, and that trust is really built in connection to the support, and we're reminded of where that trust comes from. When we do that, so much, becomes possible. And it's this we build this knowing of if this is possible now, it's possible going forward. And I am somebody who can manage anything. And it almost gets exciting to face change because it's ooh, what's possible on the other side of this? And we get hungry for transformation and want more of it rather than bracing ourselves against it because we've been taught it's something that needs to be fixed. We open to it because it's a filled with possibility and we love possibility. Possibility is delicious. And so that's the myth of being fixed. It doesn't exist. There's nothing about us that needs to be fixed. There's just parts of us that need to be rediscovered or come home to or remembered or discovered. And so next, we're going to talk about the self-help industrial complex and how we got here. And I'll delve a little bit more into, how that really fuels this fixing and how rather than self-help or fixing, how doula support is really what is key to all of these changes being filled with potential and possibility and authenticity and groundedness. So thank you for your time today, and I'll see you in the next part of this series.